Welcome to the Politicrat. I'm Omar Moore. It is Tuesday, April the 20th, 2021.
Members of the jury, I will now read the verdicts as they will appear in the permanent records of the 4th Judicial District. State of Minnesota, County of Hennepin, District Court, 4th Judicial District. State of Minnesota Plaintiff versus Derek Michael Chauvin, Defendant. Verdict, Count 1. Court file number 27, CR 20-12646. We, the jury, in the above entitled matter as to Count 1, unintentional second-degree murder while committing a felony, find the defendant guilty. This verdict agreed to this 20th day of April 2021 at 1:44 p.m. Signed, juror foreperson, juror number 19. Same caption, verdict count 2. We, the jury, in the above entitled matter as to count 2, third-degree murder, perpetrating an eminently dangerous act, find the defendant guilty. This verdict agreed to this 20th day of April 2021 at 1:45 p.m. Signed by jury foreperson, juror number 19. Same caption, verdict count 3. We, the jury, in the above entitled matter as to count 3, second-degree manslaughter, culpable negligence, creating an unreasonable risk, find the defendant guilty. This verdict agreed to this 20th day of April 2021 at 1:45 p.m. Jury foreperson 019. Members of the jury, I'm now going to ask you individually if these are your true and correct verdicts. Please respond yes or no. Juror number 2, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 9, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 19, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 27, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 44, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 52, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 55, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 79, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 85, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 89, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 91, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 92, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Are these your verdicts? So say you one, so say you all.
Yes.
Yes.
Welcome back. This is a day that I don't know what to say, really. You heard it there. The judge, Bruce Cahill of Hennepin County Court in Minneapolis, reading out the juror verdict. All 12 jurors. And it's just, I really am speechless. Derek Chauvin, the murdering cop, no longer a cop, but a murderer forever, convicted on all charges today. The jury took barely 10 hours to deliberate, and they came to a unanimous verdict on all the charges. Second-degree unintentional murder, Derek Chauvin guilty. Third-degree murder, second-degree unintentional murder, Derek Chauvin guilty. Third-degree murder, Derek Chauvin guilty. Second-degree manslaughter, Derek Chauvin guilty. And I want to thank the jury for doing the right thing. One of the issues for me was whether or not the white jurors, the 6 of them that were on this jury, would be able to see us as black people as human beings. The answer obviously was a resounding yes. I want to, at this point, say to the family of George Floyd that I am with you 1,000%, have been since May the 25th, 2020, And I am far, obviously, from the only one. The world is with you in this moment. No doubt for you, a bittersweet moment, a moment of relief. And I think that that is going to be the thing that describes my emotions, because I am relieved that this has happened. Relieved not because there's going to be some violent reaction. That's not why I'm relieved. I am relieved because it is an affirmation that there actually is some, and I underline that word and put an asterisk on either side of that word, some justice. That black persons in the United States can actually receive a modicum of it. And I want to say again to the family of George Floyd, I'm sure that, again, this is a bittersweet day for you. I think that obviously you are relieved about this verdict happening. I think a lot of people are, but first and foremost, I want to pay tribute to the family of George Floyd. Their commitment, their steadfast activism, their relentlessness about making sure that their loved one received justice was really something that I really absolutely treasured. And it's not easy for a family to be living this kind of pain out in the public spotlight. It is not easy for that to take place. And a big support network is always a huge factor. And obviously, George Floyd's family really love and care about each other and supported each other through these very, very difficult days. And of course, they'll have these difficult days for the rest of their lives, because George Floyd should be here right now. On this day, at least, on this day, at this time, there is a small measure of relief, a small measure, because even this verdict today, far from it, of course, is not going to bring George Floyd back. Nothing will. Nothing will. The one small bit of comfort that that family has on this day is that the cop, the white male cop, who tortured and murdered their loved one for nearly 10 minutes, is going to see the inside of a prison cell. In fact, that's where he is right now as I speak. It is accountability. And you'll be hearing from the Attorney General of Minnesota, Keith Allison, shortly. In his entirety, I have a statement that he made today, shortly after this verdict was announced. And I think you need to listen to that statement in its entirety. He does stumble a little bit over some of his words. I'm sure he was very excited because it was a monumental day for the Attorney General's office in Minnesota and also for that prosecution team. And I'll talk about them in a few minutes. But this is really a moment to celebrate that there actually is a modicum of justice. Now, that celebration, to be quite frank with you and not to pour cold water on this, is one that we do cautiously, because I do it cautiously, because there's still a sentencing that's going to happen in the next 2 or 3 months. I believe it's going to be in either May or June, where the sentencing will formally happen for Derek Chauvin. And we need to see what the sentencing is going to be. But in the meantime, those of you listening must be aware of the fact that Derek Chauvin, right after that verdict was read out, was placed in handcuffs. And the first thing I thought of, dear listener, was George Floyd and how Derek Chauvin put handcuffs on George Floyd, and with handcuffs behind his back, Derek Chauvin sat on George Floyd and then pressed his knee into the neck of George Floyd for 9.5 minutes. 9 minutes, 29 seconds. That's the first thing that I thought of when I saw the sheriff's deputy in that courthouse, in that courtroom, put the handcuffs on Derek Chauvin. And then you watch as Derek Chauvin is led out of there in handcuffs behind his back. So that piece of garbage, that murdering bastard, is in prison right now. And I do hope that when he is sentenced in the next couple of months, that he will get every bit, every second of those years that each of those counts calls for. Now, I know this because he was not charged with first-degree murder, and he should have been. He will not be spending life in prison, even on these charges, even if the charges run consecutively. He still won't face life. He'll probably get close to 30 years, which is not a life sentence. At 45 years of age, he'd be out at 75. And that, to me, is not a life sentence. Some would beg to differ. But this is, for me, a day of cautious celebration, relief most of all. Obviously pleased, but not smiling and jumping up and down for joy. But also I'm sad that it had to come to this, that it had to come to a cop sitting on the neck of a handcuffed man who was screaming for his life, screaming for his mother, and you had everybody watching and videotaping this and video recording it, and that it had to come down to months upon months of protests around the world. And it had to come down to a prosecution team that worked really hard, as much as I thought that they weren't up to snuff. But it took all of those things and the steadfastness of that family to ensure this moment. And all the people who testified in that trial, the community, the braveness and the courage of Darnella Frazier to put on that cell phone video and record it and press record and just hold still and record all of that. Without her video, this moment today would not have happened. But that's why I'm sad, that for us to get any modicum of justice, this is what we as black people have to go through. And all of those things had to happen. Those medical witnesses were really important. The closing arguments were really important, especially Jerry Blackwell at the end there. I said it to you. And maybe I didn't say it to you because I actually had a previous episode ready to go, which was going to be a recap of the closing arguments, which I have not discussed in real appreciable length here at all, because yesterday I was talking about the closing arguments about to happen, so I did not get to that. But Jerry Blackwell's closing argument yesterday was a masterful presentation. His closing rebuttal. Steve, Slisher or Slisher. Depending on who you listen to, it's both. But Steve Slisher, I mean, he had a good closing argument and a very good final couple of minutes. And it took all of these things, Dr. Martin Tobin and Donald Williams and, Genevieve Hansen and Courtney Ross and Charles McMillan was a really key witness in that first week. And I didn't think that first week went particularly well for the prosecution. But it took all of these elements just to get a modicum of justice. And still, we hold our breath. Why? Because, as I said, the sentencing is coming up in a couple of months. Who knows how it's going to play out? So on this day, for me, it's more of relief, but tinged with sadness because, again, George Floyd should still be here with us. This is a moment, though, that I think the world will certainly be raising a glass to. That the whole world was watching. The whole world made it clear where they stood. The vast majority of the world made it very clear where they stood. And they stood with George Floyd and with justice. And on this day, at least, they got justice.
Dear God, we thank you for giving us the strength to stand together. Sometimes we would question each other. Sometimes we say this is just going to be a waste of time. But somehow you touch us in the midnight hours and teach us to hold on. And that if we would be faithful over a few things, you'd give us the victory over many. We thank you because we know it was not any doing of ours, but your loving kindness and your tender mercy that made tonight possible. Bless those that worked, that made this prosecution something they couldn't deny. Bless those policemen that got on the stand and testified against another policeman. Bless the jury that listened to the evidence and didn't listen to those that may criticize them for doing this. Bless the prosecutor, Keith Allison, and his staff that did their job, even though they didn't know what the outcome would be. Bless Ben Crump in a special way, that worked tirelessly, that jumped on planes and left his family to make sure that justice would rain down. Thank you for all of the civil and human rights leaders that stood up. And we thank you for the nameless grandmas and grandpas that would get on their knees and ask you to give us a victory this time. And Lord, as we give you the thanks and give you the praise, let George know that his name is going down in history. They may have put their knee on his neck, but he will now be a figure that we will take the knees off our necks now, and we give you the praise. Thank you. And God, we give you the glory. These blessings we ask in your name. Amen.
Amen. America, let's pause for a moment to proclaim this historical moment, not just for the legacy of George Floyd, but for the legacy of America. The legacy of trying to make America for all Americans, so that George Floyd's victory and America's quest for equal justice under the law would be intertwined. America, let's frame this moment as a moment where we finally are getting close to living up to our Declaration of Independence, that we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equally, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that amongst them are life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. Where America, that means all of us. That means black people. That means Hispanic people. That means Native people. That means Asian people. That means all of us, America. We frame this moment for all of us, not just for George Floyd. This is a victory for those who champion humanity over inhumanity, those who champion justice over injustice, those who champion morals over immorality. America, let's lean into this moment and let's make sure, Reverend Al, that this moment will be documented for our children yet unborn as they continue on the journey to justice, knowing that the blood of George Floyd will give them a trail to find a way to a better America, a more just America, where Breonna Taylor gets an opportunity to sleep in peace at night without the police busting in her front door. A more just America, where Ahmaud Arbery gets to run free and not be lynched for jogging while black. A more just America, where Jacob Blake and Anthony McClain and Walter Scott and Laquan McDonald and all these other black men, Terrence Crutcher, who was shot in the back while running away like Dante Wright was just a week ago, because for some reason, black men running away from the police is more dangerous than young white men who commit mass murders and walk towards the police with an assault weapon, Reverend Bryant, like Kyle Rittenhouse in Kenosha, Wisconsin. America, let this be the precedent. Yes. Let this be the precedent where we live up to the high ideals and the promises when we say liberty and justice for all. Those sun-kissed children are included in all. Those children who overcame slavery, the Middle Passage, the Dred Scott decision, Plessy v. Ferguson, Jim Crow, and his much smarter, wiser son, Jim Crow Jr. Esquire. Let this be the precedence where we overcome systematic racism and oppression, and that we are a better people, and we will leave our children a better world for us all. At this time, we will hear from a great lawyer, because nobody does this alone. It's always a team effort. And we have the lawyers, the preachers, the civil rights leaders, the education leaders, the activists. Let's give a big round of applause for the activists.
Yeah, that's right.
The people who stayed in the streets.
That's right.
The people who came nationally, but more importantly, the people who were here locally, who were standing up for George Floyd on 38th and Chicago Avenue, day in and day out. Silky, the people who wouldn't go home, wouldn't stay quiet. Reverend Jackson, the people who followed y'all example. Donna Williams. Donna supposed to be here. Donna. Yeah. So, we love you, Donna.
Welcome back. That was Reverend Al Sharpton, followed by Attorney Ben Crump, the family attorney for George Floyd, the family attorney for Breonna Taylor, the family attorney for Ahmaud Arbery, the family attorney for just about every black person in the United States of America who has been murdered by police or by white mobs. And, those are profound words there from Attorney Ben Crump. Before that, the prayer from Reverend Sharpton, and I thought that prayer was important. And I'm not a particularly religious person, but as a Christian, actually, I felt obliged to put that in there because I just think that particular prayer had some resonance. So I hope I'm not offending anybody who is not Christian, but I do hope that people who aren't religious, and I'm not a religious person either, people who are agnostic or people who are atheists, do at least forgive me for a moment for putting that in there. I just think it's important because prayers are important whether you're religious or not, in my view. So there you go. Those are some really important words from both Reverend Sharpton and, in particular, Ben Crump. As Reverend Sharpton calls him, the Black Attorney General, the Attorney General for Black America. I definitely think that's true. I wish he didn't have to be, though, because that means that if he wasn't, we wouldn't be having all these murders of black folk in this country by the state, by police, by these white mobs, these bunch of racists who go around murdering people who are black, who are brown, who are Asian. We wouldn't have to have Ben Crump be the Attorney General of Black America now, would we? If these white men weren't running amok and being unpunished. Today, at least, one of them was punished. And it's a significant day in the United States for that reason. But again, dear listeners, I say to you, I am relieved. I definitely cried when this verdict came out. And I think the moment I cried was not when the verdict actually came out. Actually, it was later when Keith Allison was giving his press conference. That's when this hit me. And I looked back at the very people I didn't give him a chance. I just didn't. I did not think that prosecution team did enough. But I do say that Steve Schlischer and Jerry Blackwell, certainly for me, were very, very important to this case, particularly yesterday in those closing arguments. I think that Steve Schlischer, his closing argument was solid. The last couple of minutes of it I thought were very good. And I thought that Jerry Blackwell was the real star yesterday with his rebuttal closing, which you will hear a little bit of, by the way, on this episode. This is really going to be one of those episodes where you hear a lot more in audio from others than from yours truly, because this is certainly not for me to be talking on this particular episode, on this particular day. This has been one of those kinds of days that you do mark down in history. Of all days, April the 20th, my goodness me, if you study April the 20th in history, you will know why it is quite a stunning moment, because anybody who knows what April 20th is and whose birthday that is, and no, I'm not talking about Earth Day. I am talking about you-know-who. And it's just interesting, isn't it, how things happen? It just really is. I do want to, at this moment, play this roughly, I think, 10 minutes of what the Attorney General of Minnesota had to say, Mr. Keith Allison, who was at one point the number 2 in the Democratic National Committee, should have been the chair of that committee. Luckily, he decided, you know what, if I've been voted number 2, I'll do it, but I'll leave for greener pastures. He decided to leave the number 2 role, ran for Attorney General of Minnesota. He won that election, became Attorney General of Minnesota. I think the first Muslim Attorney General of any state, if I'm not mistaken. And he now, after all of the things that went on in this case, he now has a huge moment to take for lack of a better word, victory lap here. Because he and that prosecution team obviously did a whole lot better than I thought. And, I do give them credit. For me, the turning point was week number 2, when you had all the medical experts in there. And of course, looking back at this whole trial, the strongest piece of evidence was obviously the videotape. I think the most significant witness was first the medical doctor, Dr. Martin Tobin. I think Donald Williams was incredibly significant as well. I think he's right there as well in terms of the most significant witnesses. I would also add to that Charles McMillan. I also think that a significant witness obviously was Darnella Frazier. She's the one that the video recordings have come from. I mean, if it wasn't for her, we wouldn't be here, and this guy would have walked. I mean, this wouldn't have even gone to trial. It wouldn't have been an indicted situation at all. He wouldn't even have been indicted had it not been for Darnella Frazier. So Darnella Frazier, to me, is, I'd say even more so than Dr. Tobin, the most significant witness. And she did testify. So, you look at Darnell Frazier, you look at Dr. Martin Tobin, you look at Donald Williams, who was there with Darnella Frazier, standing literally 5 feet or so away from the murderer. You look at, other people as well, like Genevieve Hansen. They ended up being significant witnesses. I didn't think that Genevieve Hansen was particularly significant. But turns out the jury must have thought so. And, it goes from there. I think the key was the second week. And look, the jury deliberated for 10 hours. That is not very long. And really, when you think about it, should you have expected the jury to deliberate very long after watching that video? I mean, there really wasn't much to deliberate about in the end, was there now, when you really think about it? But even with that said, 10 hours was remarkably quick. And this is a jury that had 6 white people on it, 4 black people on it, and as they describe themselves, 2 mixed race people on it, for a total of 12 jurors. And in a county that is 77% white, as Hennepin County is, that tells you something. It tells you that the prosecution obviously did their job. It tells you that their strongest evidence was obviously the videotape. And most of all, as I have said from the start, it tells you that those white jurors saw the humanity of us as black people. And obviously they imputed that to George Floyd. They saw his humanity. And, I said that if those white jurors saw the humanity of George Floyd, if those white jurors, more precisely I said, if they, as white jurors, saw the humanity of us as black people, then the prosecution would have an excellent chance here. They'd have a good chance. And that's exactly what happened. It wasn't just about proof beyond a reasonable doubt. It wasn't just about the video. Obviously, the video is the proof. It's right there in front of you. It was also that those white jurors refused to look away. refused to say, oh, he's just a piece of garbage, he's not a human being. Refused to fall for the racist garbage of the defendant's attorney, killer's attorney, Eric Nelson, who had a disastrous trial and had a horrible closing argument that lasted nearly 3 hours that had to be interrupted by a near half-hour break yesterday. And in his closing, put the video in many, many times of George Floyd saying, I can't breathe, screaming for his life, begging for his life. And that's what the defendant's attorney put in his closing argument. So, I mean, the defense attorney also handed this case over on a platter as well. And Derek Chauvin is guilty as sin. And you and I both know that, dear listener, that he is. And now 12 people have said he is. The most important 12 people in the world. That now Judge Bruce Cahill is going to now release their names of, which I think is despicable. Judge Cahill did not do himself any good in the way he administered this case, this trial. And by the way, that is probably going to be why there's going to be an appeal here. And I won't be surprised if it gets accepted in some of these grounds that will be asserted. Not for Congresswoman Maxine Waters, because that's nonsense. This idea that somehow she had an issue, she affected this outcome or did this nonsense. That's not going to be something you're going to appeal successfully. But some of the other stuff that the judge did or didn't do, it wouldn't shock me, which is why I am cautiously celebrating, and which is why I'm not so much celebrating as I am relieved. And relieved because there is now an instance in this country where a white male police officer will actually be convicted and has been convicted. One, there was one in Kentucky a few years back, but one that was caught on video that we all saw for nearly 10 minutes. And the jury didn't even get to hear about the history this guy had, Derek Chauvin, a violent person. And the force cannot let someone like that go on to another job. And there's too many of these situations, like in the case of Tamir Rice, who was murdered, where that guy went to a police precinct a couple of towns over. Within the next 3 or 4 months, he got another job. Within the next 6 months. Wasn't ever indicted. So this is the system that we've got to keep fighting against. Yes, this is one verdict, and I'm glad that it's happened. But again, we've still got to get to the sentencing, and we must, acknowledge that some accountability was met here, and there was a modicum of justice. All 3 counts. But the never-ending battle for justice continues. A luta continua. I want to now play you the words of Keith Allison. It's a little long, 10 minutes or so, and sometimes you will find him not to be the most articulate attorney general. I think he's kind of, because he's excited that he has put together this team and the team around them of prosecutors who absolutely ended up winning this case, which, although for you and I and anybody watching that video is a slam dunk case, but when you're in a courtroom and you've got 12 people and you do not know what they're thinking upstairs in those brains of theirs, it's a difficult case in that regard. And beyond a reasonable doubt is a very difficult standard. It is not a slam dunk. You've got to go the extra mile. And I sat here saying that I don't think that they did enough. They had a very good second week, and I think that was the key. And obviously the videotape is critical. Without that videotape, there's no way that we would have seen Derek Chauvin walking off in handcuffs today. It just wouldn't have happened. But thankfully it has happened, and thankfully the prosecution did a better job than I gave them credit for. And obviously a lot of you felt that they did a much better job than I felt. And look, it's not about me. It's about a very significant day today. And while I am relieved and happy in that sense, I put quotation marks around the word happy, because at the end of the day, George Floyd is not returning. And at the end of the day, this should never, ever have happened. And the other moment for me is carry your cell phone video around, carry your cell phone around, be ready to record. You never know when you're going to have to do that. I ask you all, and I include myself, I ask myself, would I have been brave enough to roll that video device? Of course. Actually, I answer that. I would have. I guess you all have to, if you're listening to me now, ask yourselves the very same thing. Would you have turned on your cell phone video and recorded what you were seeing if you were standing where a minor named Darnella Frazier was standing? Would you have done that? Welcome back. Probably better to start this block with Keith Ellison. I want to play you pretty much everything that he said in the press conference that he gave shortly after this guilty verdict. Derek Chauvin found guilty on all of the charges, which again was flabbergasting to me. I never expected it. I know a lot of people did. I never thought he would be, but the turning point was very clear once it was announced earlier today that the jury had reached a verdict. And I just couldn't believe I was doing a double take at the television in the next room. I could not believe. I really couldn't believe it. That I was seeing, what, verdict reached already? And once I saw that, then my perceptions, of course, drastically changed. It would either be he's guilty of everything or he's found not guilty on anything. And obviously, it would make more sense based upon what kind of things I was seeing in that trial, especially yesterday in that closing, and then the poor closing from the defendant's attorney, Eric Nelson. It was very clear to me that this had to surely have been a guilty verdict across the board, and it was. Derek Chauvin found guilty today of all 3 counts: second-degree unintentional murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter. All guilty of those. And, you know, I'm very, very relieved and happy for George Floyd's family. Of course, it's a bittersweet happiness, obviously, for them. But there is a measure, a modicum of comfort for them. I wouldn't say closure, because that pain is always going to be there for them. I'm sure it will be. Oh my goodness me. But I'm sure they'll be able to sleep just a tiny bit better tonight. Tiny bit better. And that's the end of the reality of this, right? The reality is that there's a family that is out there that is hurting. And even though they did get justice, or at least accountability, as you'll hear from Keith Ellison, it's a good day. It's a good day in the country. It's I'd say a great day for the country, for the United States of America, to see that there are 12 people who see our humanity and do deliver justice in a verdict that was absolutely the right one. It could only have been this verdict. This is the only acceptable thing as far as I'm concerned. And I doubted this all along, because I've seen too many years, as have you, dear listener, where justice was never in the cards for us and never was happening. And to actually be in a position where I'm saying, oh my goodness, it actually happened, and they actually did see our humanity for once and actually render the verdict, that the only verdict that made any sense, it certainly does give you a momentary flicker of hope. But hey, this is only one case. And there's still so many cases. You've got Dante Wright, you've got Adam Toledo, you've got Breonna Taylor, who did not get justice. You've got Ahmaud Arbery. You've got so many, and so many before. Rodney King never got justice. Eric Garner never got justice. And so many others. Michael Brown didn't. So, like I say, it's a bittersweet day. And here is Keith Ellison. I promise, here he is now, the Attorney General of the state of Minnesota.
When I became the lead prosecutor for the case, I asked for time and patience to review the facts, gather evidence, and prosecute for the murder of George Floyd to the fullest extent the law allowed. I want to thank the community for giving us that time and allowing us to do our work. That long, hard, painstaking work has culminated today. I would not call today's verdict justice, however, because justice implies true restoration. But it is accountability, which is the first step towards justice. And now the cause of justice is in your hands. And when I say your hands, I mean the hands of the people of the United States. George Floyd mattered. He was loved by his family and his friends. His death shocked the conscience of our community, our country, the whole world. He was loved by his family and friends. But that isn't why he mattered. He mattered because he was a human being. And there is no way we can turn away from that reality. The people who stopped and raised their voices on May 25th, 2020, were a bouquet of humanity. A phrase I stole from my friend Jerry Blackwell. A bouquet of humanity. Old, young, men and women, black and white, a man from the neighborhood just walking to get a drink, a child going to buy a snack with her cousin, an off-duty firefighter on her way to a community garden, brave young women, teenagers, who press record on their cell phones. Why did they stop? They didn't know George Floyd. They didn't know he had a beautiful family. They didn't know he had been a great athlete. And they didn't know he was a proud father or that he had people in his life who loved him. They stopped and raised their voices, and they even challenged authority because they saw his humanity. They stopped and they raised their voices because they knew that what they were seeing was wrong. They didn't need to be medical professionals or experts in the use of force. They knew it was wrong. And they were right. These community members, this bouquet of humanity, did it again in this trial. They performed simple yet profound acts of courage. They told the truth, and they told the whole world the truth about what they saw. They were vindicated by the chief of police, by Minneapolis' longest-serving police officer, and by many other police officers who stepped up and testified as to what they saw and to what they knew. What happened on that street was wrong. We owe it, and we owe our gratitude to we owe them our gratitude for fulfilling their civic duty and for their courage in telling the truth. To countless people in Minnesota and across the United States who joined them in peacefully demanding justice for George Floyd, we say, all of us, thank you. In the coming days, more may seek to express themselves again through petition and demonstration. I urge everyone to honor the legacy of George Floyd by doing so calmly, legally, and peacefully. I urge everyone to continue the journey to transformation and justice. It's in your hands now. I also want to address the Floyd family, if I may. Over the last year, the family of George Floyd had to relive again and again the worst day of their lives when they lost their brother, their father, their friend. I'm profoundly grateful to them for giving us the time we needed to prosecute this case. They have shown the world what grace and class and courage really look like. Although a verdict alone cannot end their pain, I hope it's another step on the long path toward healing for them. There's no replacing your beloved Perry, or Floyd, as his friends called him, but he is the one who sparked a worldwide movement, and that's important. We owe our thanks to the men and women of the jury who gave many hours of their time and attention to carefully listening to the evidence, weighing the facts, rendering a verdict. They are regular people from all walks of life, a lot like that bouquet of humanity on that corner on May 25th and in that courtroom. They answered the call, and they served in a landmark trial. They now deserve to return to their lives. If they ask you to respect their privacy, we ask you to honor that request. I want to acknowledge the remarkable team that helped us prosecute the case. We put everything we had into this prosecution. We presented the best case that we could, and the jury heard us, and we're grateful for that. We had the sole burden of proof in the case, and history shows that winning cases like these can be difficult. I'm proud of every hour, every minute, and every ounce of effort we put in this case, and let me tell you, we spent many hours working on this case, did we not? We, week after week, committee meeting after committee meeting, this team never let up, and it never quit. We fought every day, and we did it together. The Attorney General's office together with the Hennepin County Attorney's office. Thank you, sir. And we did it together. I'm deeply grateful to everyone who worked on the case. Most of these folks will tell you it's a bad idea to put together a team of all Michael Jordans. Nobody would want to pass the ball. This team, that was their true strength, is sharing the load, passing the ball, understanding that all of us together are smarter than any one of us alone. And that worked. Although the verdict has been rendered, this is not the end. In the coming weeks, the court will determine sentencing, and later this summer, we expect to present another case. We will not be talking about that. This verdict reminds us how hard it is to make enduring change. And I just want to finish by sharing some important historical legacy, if you allow me. In 1968, the Kerner Commission was formed to investigate the causes of uprisings across major American cities. And a man named Dr. Kenneth Clark, a famous African-American psychologist who, along with his equally accomplished psychologist wife, Mamie, contributed to compelling research in the Brown versus Board of Education case. And Dr. Clark testified at the Kerner Commission. And I want to quote you what he said. I read that report, the one in the 1919 riot in Chicago, and it was as if I were reading the report of investigating the committee of the Harlem riot in 1935, the report on investigating the Harlem riot in 1943, and the report of the McCone Commission on the Watts riot. I must say again in candor to you, the members of this commission, it's like a kind of an Alice in Wonderland with the same moving picture reshown over and over again, the same analysis, the same recommendation, and the same inaction. Those are the words of Dr. Clark in 1968. Here we are in 2021. Here we are in 2021, still addressing the same problem. Since Dr. Clark testified, we have seen Rodney King, Abner Louima, Oscar Grant, Eric Garner, Michael Brown, Freddie Gray, Sandra Bland, Philando Castile, Laquan McDonald, Stephon Clark, Atiana Jefferson, Anton Black, Breonna Taylor, and now Dante Wright and Adam Toledo. This has to end. We need true justice. That's not one case. That is a social transformation that says that nobody's beneath the law and no one is above it. This verdict reminds us that we must make enduring, systemic, societal change. More than a month ago, months before George Floyd was murdered, the Minnesota Public Safety Commissioner John Harrington and I released the recommendations of our working group on reducing deadly force encounters with law enforcement. What all of us in that working group, including law enforcement, wanted is for everyone to go home safe. Anytime someone doesn't, everyone's lives are changed forever. We need to use this verdict as an inflection point. What if we just prevented the problem instead of having to try these cases? We don't want any more community members dying at the hands of law enforcement and their families' lives ruined. We don't want any more law enforcement members having to face criminal charges and their families' lives ruined. We don't want any more communities torn apart. One way to prevent this is to get into a new relationship where we as a society re-examine the use of force and our old settled assumptions. I'm so proud of Chief Arredondo and the Minneapolis police officers who by their testimony said enough is enough. And another way to prevent it is by acknowledging and lifting up everyone's humanity, helping communities heal, and officers be well. Another way to prevent it is with accountability. Passing laws and instituting policies and training is important, but they must be more than words on paper, and there must be accountability for violating them. With this verdict, we have brought some accountability. Finally, this verdict demands us to never give up the hope that we can make enduring change. Generations of people said slavery would never end. Generations said Jim Crow would never end. Generations said women would never be equal to men. Generations said if you were different in any way, you could never be a full and equal member of our society. Today, we have to end this travesty of recurring, enduring deaths at the hands of law enforcement. Those beliefs are things we have to focus our attention on. And as I now do close, I just want to say to you, the work of our generation is to put unaccountable law enforcement behind us. It's time to transform the relationship between community and the people who are sworn to protect them from one that is mistrustful, suspicious, and in some cases terrifying, into one that is empathetic, compassionate, and affirming. With that will benefit everyone, including police officers who deserve to serve in a profession that is honored, in departments where they don't have to worry about colleagues who don't follow the rules. Now that work is in your hands. The work of our generation is to put an end to the vestiges of Jim Crow and the centuries of trauma, and finally put an end to racism. We can end it. It doesn't have to be with us into the future if we decide now to have true liberty and justice for all. The work of our generation is to say goodbye to old practices that don't serve us anymore and to put them all behind us. One conviction, even one like this one can create a powerful new opening to shed old practices and reset relationships. So with that, I just want to say that I do hope that people step forward and understand that nobody can do everything, but everybody can do something. You can do something the way like everyday people like Donald Williams and Genevieve Hansen and Christopher Martin and Charles McMillan and all those teenagers and young people stepped up and did something. You can do things like help pass the George Floyd Justice and Accountability Act. It's in your hands.
You got a summons in the mail. And here you are. All converged on one spot. Now, our system, we have power. The power actually belongs to us, the people. And we give it to the government in trust for us to hold and to use appropriately. But sometimes we take it back. Sometimes when something is really important, we reserve those decisions for ourselves. The state, we have power. We cannot convict the defendant. The judge has power, but he cannot convict the defendant. That power belongs to you. You have that power, and only you have the power to convict the defendant of these crimes, and in so doing, declare that this use of force was unreasonable. It was excessive. It was grossly disproportionate. It is not an excuse for the shocking abuse that you saw with your own eyes, and you can believe your own eyes. This case is exactly what you thought when you saw it first, when you saw that video. It is exactly that. You can believe your eyes. It's exactly what you believed. It's exactly what you saw with your eyes. It's exactly what you knew. It's what you felt in your gut. It's what you now know in your heart. This wasn't policing. This was murder. The defendant is guilty of all 3 counts. All of them. And there's no excuse. Thank you.
I have a correction to make. Those reports suggest and say that Derek Chauvin could face up to 40 years, 40 years, in prison on sentencing coming up in June. The likelihood is that he'll probably serve about 12 or 13 years in total. I certainly hope that he is sentenced a lot more heavily than that. But of course, we shall see. And I am not optimistic about this.
Especially to our legal team, Ben, Tony, Justin, Chris, Justin back here. Definitely thank you to Keith Allison and his team. I think they did an amazing job from start to finish. All of the evidence, all of the witnesses, everything proved exactly what we saw in that video. But yet, we still question the decision of the jury, and I wonder why. Oftentimes, this system fails us as black men and women in America. With all evidence there, everything pointing to a guilty verdict, we somehow still don't get the guilty verdict. Or in some cases, I got my good friend Kenny Walker back here.
Yeah.
We don't even get charges.
Yeah, right.
So today is a pivotal moment for America. It's something this country has needed for a long time now.
Yes.
And hopefully today is the start of that. When I say a pivotal moment, we need change in this broken system. It was built to oppress us. It was built against us. Oftentimes, we see people who are supposed to protect and serve. Supposed to protect and serve. They do the total opposite. On the first day of trial, Rev Sharpton, we had a press conference, and we kneeled for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. And when I got up, and it was my turn to speak, I said that every time I come out here, it's hard. Because this is the exact place where they took somebody from me that I love. And I absolutely dislike coming here. But I also said, this time it was easy. We came for one thing and one thing only. That was justice for George Floyd. And today, that's what we got. So this time it wasn't hard at all. It wasn't hard at all. I'm big on faith and prayer.
Yes.
I had a lot of faith. But I was also optimistic. We need police reform bad.
Yeah.
These guys are able to wear a badge and go out in the field, which means that they're qualified and trained to do their job at a high level. But when you shoot and kill a man that's running away from you that doesn't pose a threat, Either you're not qualified and undertrained, or it's a choice and you want to kill black men and women. It's either one or the other. Yeah. And I think today, Keith Ellison and his team proved that just because you are the law, you're not above the law.
Yeah.
We need each and every officer to be held accountable. And until then, it's still scary to be a black man and woman in America and counting police.
Yeah.
So when I say today is a pivotal moment, it's a chance for America to take a turn in the right direction and right a lot of wrongs so that we don't keep adding to these names. So that little girls and boys like Gianna are not growing up fatherless.
Yes, sir.
So that families don't feel the pain we feel. It's a lot of sleepless nights.
Yes.
No family should go through that. And hopefully our country take a turn in the right direction today. And this day in history proves that it was a turning point. Thank you.
That was Brandon Williams, the nephew of George Floyd. And Brandon Williams was really regarded as the son of George Floyd, really his son, because that's really the kind of relationship that they had. Really well said, well said. I totally agree. I mean, this is everything I would say. I mean, I couldn't have put it any better than Brandon Williams. So, this is what the day looks like here in the United States. It is a nice moment, a good moment, a positive moment to see justice be done. But again, I don't want to be jumping up and down here. I know there will be people who are, but I am very happy and relieved that this day is here, and relieved in the sense, again, that there are people who see our humanity and who believe that cops who murder us should go to prison for it. And there are prosecutors who do care enough to put a lot of hours in to make that happen, and witnesses and police who stepped forward, current police in that Minneapolis Police Department, who testified against a killer cop, one of their own, and also the chief of that same Minneapolis Police Department doing the very same, testifying against a murderer, and all these other people who are still in the department there doing that. So maybe there isn't such a blue wall of silence anymore. Maybe there were a few good cops. Maybe there were. But the vast majority of them are nowhere to be seen, and they're not good if they don't stand up and come forward. I would love to see police today come forward and say, yes, this was a good verdict. But I haven't heard them yet. Have you? Thank you very much for listening to this edition of the Politicrat. I'm Omar Moore. Ma'Khia Bryant was shot dead by a Columbus, Ohio police officer. There'll be more on this story coming up on tomorrow's episode of the Politicrat Daily Podcast. May Ma'Khia Bryant rest in power. She was just 15 years of age. My condolences to her family.
There are days, this is one of them, when you wonder what your role is in this country and what your future is in it. Mm-hmm. How precisely you're going to reconcile yourself to your situation here, and how you're going to communicate to the vast heedless, unthinking, cruel white majority that you are here. I'm terrified at the moral apathy, the death of the heart, which is happening in my country. These people have deluded themselves for so long that they really don't think I'm human. I base this on their conduct, not on what they say. And this means that they have become, in themselves, moral monsters.